History is often written in blood and steel, but the story of Desmond Doss defies the very nature of warfare. He was an anomaly, a man who stepped into the heart of the most violent conflict in human history without a single weapon in his hand. Doss was far from your typical soldier. He would eventually become a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the most prestigious and highest military decoration awarded by the United States of America. Serving as a combat medic, he saved the lives of dozens of his fellow soldiers in the heat of battle without ever firing a shot. His refusal to carry a weapon was not born of cowardice, but of a profound religious conviction that forbade him from taking a human life. Born in 1919 within the borders of Virginia, Doss was raised under the strict tenets of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This Christian denomination held several core beliefs that would define his path: the sanctity of Saturday as the Sabbath, the belief in the imminent second coming of Jesus Christ, a commitment to nonviolence, and a lifestyle centered on a vegetarian diet. For Doss, the Bible was not merely a book, but a literal blueprint for existence. He viewed the Ten Commandments as the absolute foundation of his moral compass, adhering to them with a devotion that few could comprehend. When the fires of World War II began to consume the globe, Doss found himself trapped in a moral paradox. He believed the war against tyranny was a just cause, yet he remained steadfast in his belief that killing another human being, regardless of the circumstances, was an unforgivable sin. At the time, he was working as a joiner at the Newport News Naval Shipyard, a position that could have granted him a deferment from military service. However, driven by a sense of patriotic duty, he chose to enlist in the United States Army on April 1, 1942. He was assigned to the 77th Infantry Division, operating under the assumption that his status as a conscientious objector would naturally lead to a role that did not require him to bear arms. For Desmond Doss, one specific commandment echoed louder than all others: "Thou shalt not kill." He was perplexed and troubled when he found himself assigned as a rifleman rather than in a medical capacity. His commanding officers, viewing his refusal to carry a weapon as a liability that could endanger the entire unit, placed immense pressure on him to conform. They saw a soldier without a rifle as a hole in their defenses, but Doss remained immovable. Even for medics, it was standard practice during that era to carry an M111A1 pistol or an M1 carbine for personal protection. Under the Geneva Convention, a medic was permitted to carry a weapon for self-defense, but the moment they used it offensively, they forfeited their protected status and could be legally targeted by the enemy. The tension within the unit only escalated as his fellow soldiers began to mock his faith. They watched him read his Bible daily and strictly observe the Seventh-day Adventist tradition of Saturday worship. Doss repeatedly requested to have Saturdays off to observe the Sabbath, offering to work on Sundays instead. Eventually, the regimental chaplain, Captain Stanley, began to sympathize with Doss's plight. Stanley intervened, helping Doss transfer from the infantry to medical training and taking the Sabbath issue to divisional headquarters. It was ultimately decided that Adventist soldiers would be granted Saturdays off, just as other soldiers were given Sundays. However, this accommodation only deepened the resentment among his peers. They viewed Doss as someone who was getting easy treatment, unaware that he was performing extra duties on Sundays to compensate for his absence. One soldier in his squad famously complained that Doss received more passes than a general. His strict vegetarianism further alienated him, marking him as an outsider in a culture of rugged militarism. The hostility reached a breaking point when one man in his unit issued a chilling, ominous warning. "When we go into combat, Doss, you're not coming back alive. I'm going to shoot you myself." Undeterred, Doss accepted his role as a combat medic, famously stating that while others were taking lives, he would be dedicated to saving them. The friction between Doss and his company began to dissolve during a grueling 25-mile march. The men were required to complete the trek in 8 hours, carrying full field packs and rifles. Many assumed Doss would have it easy since he carried no weapon, but they failed to realize that his 2 canvas medical bags were nearly as heavy and far more cumbersome than any rifle. As the miles wore on, the soldiers succumbed to exhaustion, dehydration, and agonizing blisters. Some collapsed entirely. Throughout the ordeal, Doss was everywhere, offering a helping hand and words of encouragement. At the end of the march, despite his own fatigue, he insisted on inspecting everyone's feet and providing medical care. That day, he earned the hard-won respect of his unit. For the first time, he was truly one of them. As a qualified combat medic, Doss was now responsible for providing immediate trauma care on the front lines. He was bound to his unit, destined to follow them into the most dangerous zones of the Pacific Theater. The 77th Division saw its first taste of real combat on May 11, 1943, and Doss and his comrades were rapidly trained to fill the gaps left by mounting losses. By the end of the war, the 77th would spend 208 days in official combat, suffering a staggering 9,212 casualties. Doss's first true baptism by fire occurred during the Battle of Guam, a bloody campaign lasting from July 21st to August 10, 1944. The mission was to reclaim the U.S. territory from a fanatical Japanese garrison of nearly 20,000 troops. While the Geneva Convention theoretically protected medics, Japanese snipers and machine gunners intentionally targeted them, viewing the loss of a medic as a devastating blow to American morale and survival. Consequently, many medics in the Pacific removed their Red Cross insignia to avoid becoming primary targets. Doss, however, was constantly under fire, moving through the chaos to tend to the fallen. The brutality of the jungle was revealed to Doss on his very first day. A young, inexperienced recruit spotted a fountain pen lying on the forest floor. Before anyone could shout a warning, the soldier picked it up, triggering a booby-trapped white phosphorus grenade. The explosion left the young man's chest a mangled mess of blood and burning metal. As he spiraled into shock, Doss performed a near miracle, stabilizing the soldier and coordinating the evacuation of him and 3 others wounded by the red-hot shrapnel. It was a harrowing introduction to the realities of war. By the end of the Battle of Guam, the casualty rate was appalling. 1 in every 6 of the 59,000 U.S. troops involved was either killed or wounded. The violence followed Doss to the Philippines during the Battle of Leyte, which spanned from October 17 to December 26, 1944. The campaign began with a massive naval bombardment and amphibious landings, followed by vicious fighting as the Americans pushed inland. During a Japanese counterattack, a fellow medic and friend of Doss, Clarence Glenn, heard a cry for help from a wounded machine gunner. Glenn rushed into the exposed no-man's land and was immediately struck by enemy fire. Doss, refusing to abandon his friend, sprinted out with a litter bearer named Herb Schechter. While bullets hissed through the air, Doss tended to the machine gunner, who had suffered a severe facial wound. They managed to fashion an improvised stretcher out of a poncho and tree branches, but tragically, Clarence Glenn died before they could reach the aid station. From that moment on, Doss made a conscious effort not to look at the faces of the men he treated, fearing he would see another friend staring back at him. The tragedy deepened when Herb Schechter was also shot and killed while he and Doss were carrying a litter, their silhouettes exposed against the sky. Beyond the constant threat of death, Doss struggled with a different kind of hardship: hunger. The meat provided in the standard K rations violated his vegetarian beliefs, leaving him to survive on tasteless crackers and whatever coconuts he could forage. On Leyte, the fallen coconuts often caused diarrhea, forcing him to climb trees for fresh ones. On one occasion, his search for food drew the attention of Japanese machine gunners. Their aim was poor, and they were eventually neutralized by American soldiers, who discovered the Japanese troops had been intoxicated on sake. Amidst this devastation, a profound shift occurred. The very man who had threatened to kill Doss during training at Fort Jackson now sought him out, asking for guidance and prayer. The final and most horrific chapter for Doss and the 77th Infantry Division was the Battle of Okinawa. This was the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War and would prove to be its bloodiest. The objective was to seize the island as a strategic base for the eventual invasion of the Japanese mainland, located only 350 miles to the north. The battle commenced on April 1st, 1945, exactly 3 years to the day after Doss had enlisted. It would rage for 81 days. Doss was assigned to the 1st Battalion, and on April 29th, they were ordered to assault the Maida Escarpment, a 400-foot vertical cliff the Americans called Hacksaw Ridge. Before ascending the cargo nets, Doss paused to say a prayer for his comrades. As they reached the summit, They were met with a wall of Japanese artillery, mortar, and machine gun fire. The enemy was deeply entrenched in caves and tunnels, launching fanatical defenses against wave after wave of American troops. On May 4th, during an attack on a fortified cave, Doss rushed to aid 4 injured soldiers. The lieutenant leading the charge had been hit by a bullet just as he was about to throw a grenade. The resulting explosion blew off his hand and wounded his men. Despite being within 25 feet of enemy lines and under a constant barrage of grenades, Doss successfully evacuated all 4 men. The following day, May 5th, he went to the rescue of an artillery officer who had been struck by shrapnel in a shell hole. Doss himself was already nursing a leg injury from a fall the previous day, yet he climbed the ridge with his heavy medical kits. He found the officer with a hole torn through his chest, the sound of his breathing whistling through the wound. Under intense fire, Doss administered blood plasma, a task that required him to stand and hold the bottle high, exposing himself to the enemy. Though the officer died before reaching the aid station, Doss's bravery was undeniable. The defining moment of Doss's life occurred when the Americans attempted to take a vital Japanese pillbox. A massive explosion triggered by American gasoline cans was followed by a ferocious Japanese counterattack. The American lines broke, and men panicked, retreating toward the cliff's edge. Doss, however, refused to leave the wounded behind. Exhausted and under heavy fire, he spent hours dragging men to the edge of the escarpment. To get the severely wounded down the 400-foot drop, he tied a rope to a tree stump and lowered them one by one on a stretcher. When the stretcher proved unstable, he improvised a new method, looping the rope around the men's torsos and legs. Witnesses saw Doss standing exposed at the edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the smoke, praying aloud, "Lord, please help me get one more." He continued until every man was down. His captain later calculated that Doss had saved approximately 75 lives that day. The Americans eventually retook the position on May 7th, and miraculously, Doss had remained untouched throughout the ordeal. But his luck would not last. On May 21st, during a night attack, Doss was tending to the wounded when a Japanese grenade landed in a shell hole with him. He instinctively put his foot on it to shield the other soldier. The blast peppered his legs with 17 pieces of shrapnel. Despite his agonizing injuries, he remained in the hole for 5 hours, treating himself and others until help arrived. As he was being carried away on a stretcher, they were caught in a tank attack. Seeing a more critically wounded man, Doss crawled off the stretcher and insisted they take the other soldier instead. While waiting for the bearers to return, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm. Doss instructed a fellow soldier on how to bind his rifle stock to his arm as a splint, eventually crawling the rest of the way to safety. For his unfathomable bravery and selfless actions between April 29th and May 21st, 1945, Desmond Doss was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. His conviction ensured that dozens of men returned home to their families. After the war, Doss lived a quiet life, running a small family farm with his wife, Dorothy, until he passed away at the age of 87. If this story of a man who refused to kill in a world consumed by death has changed how you perceive the strength of conviction, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the echoes of a past that many have tried to silence. Help us cultivate the truth of tomorrow. The next archive of human courage will be opened soon,